"I can't believe you wouldn't help your own sister," my mother added, shaking her head with that familiar expression of disappointment I had seen countless times in my life. "You have always been so selfish, Natalie. What about family loyalty?" My father yelled across the holiday table, his face red as he gripped his wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. I sat there stunned into silence as my name is Natalie Ruiz, and at 38, I had spent my entire adult life being the responsible one. I had diligently paid off all of my student loans 5 years ahead of schedule, put myself through college, and saved enough money to buy my modest Pittsburgh home. The birthday present, which they had barely acknowledged minutes earlier, was snatched up by my father and thrown carelessly into the kitchen trash can. Without any family support, my younger sister Vanessa floundered between business endeavors that ultimately failed due to her poor financial management and planning. My parents' request to sell my house, the one thing I had worked so hard to accomplish, was to save Vanessa's failing boutique, her third failed business in 5 years. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The mortgage papers for my parents' house bore my signature as guarantor, a fact they conveniently ignored whenever they criticized my life choices. I politely but firmly declined, explaining that I couldn't sacrifice my financial security and that I became the villain of the family narrative once more. When I looked across the table at Vanessa, I saw that she couldn't meet my eyes. Perhaps some part of her realized the injustice of the situation, but she remained silent as our parents continued to lash out at them. Their credit didn't qualify them for their dream home 7 years ago, so I stepped in without hesitation, without conditions, and without complaints. Something inside of me changed the familiar urge to apologize to Acquies, just to keep the peace. The tension in the room was oppressive, weighing down on my shoulders like an invisible boulder. Years of similar moments flashed through my mind, where I was always expected to make sacrifices, while Vanessa was pampered, and always served as the emergency fund while she pursued her dreams without consequence, vanished, and in its stead, a composed determination took hold. I knew what I had to do, and I had done it long ago. I quietly excused myself from the table, my chair scuffing the hardwood floor, and I stood, asking, "Where are you going?" My mother yelled after me, and in a tone that implied I was committing another crime by going to my car, I said, "I'll be right back." My mother would say, "You're the sensible one, Natalie," as if it were the norm, because being the oldest daughter in the Ruiz family had always meant responsibility. From an early age, I learned to be the reliable one, the steady hand, and the voice of reason, while Vanessa was encouraged to follow her passions and express herself freely. Highest compliment. In reality, she meant that I could be relied upon to tidy up everyone else's mess. Our parents ran a modest insurance business in Pittsburgh, which gave them a comfortable living, but was never quite sufficient to support both Vanessa's pricey preferences and their own way of life. Somehow, the gap was always something I had to deal with. The pattern continued into adulthood as I developed my career as a financial analyst at Gravora Group, meticulously saving and saving money when Vanessa needed money for art school in New York. I postponed my own graduate studies to work extra hours when she dropped out after 2 semesters to find herself in Europe. I paid off her credit card debt when our parents wanted to renovate their kitchen. In the family mythology, Vanessa was the courageous dreamer, while I was just boring, trustworthy Natalie with her. Vanessa's creative ventures, which included a photography studio, a handcrafted jewelry line, and a boutique clothing store, were all funded with family money and ultimately mismanaged into oblivion. Spreadsheets and emergency fund. 7 years ago, when our parents made the decision to buy their ideal home, a sprawling Victorian in a posh neighborhood, they couldn't really afford it. They approached me with sincere pleas and well-known appeals to family loyalty, explaining that the bank needed a guarantor. My father had explained that the paperwork was merely a formality, and will make every effort to. I hesitated at first, then realized how serious the commitment was. But I finally signed because they were my parents, had reared me, had helped me in every way, and had assured me that this would be the last time they needed my assistance. However, every year brought new crises that needed my financial assistance, and each time I convinced myself that it would be the last time, the breaking point gradually arrived. I never imagined that the holiday dinner would be the last straw, when I returned to the dining room with my family's file folder in hand. Then, like bankruptcy, little grievances accumulated, including forgotten birthdays, disparaging remarks about my career, and the way they celebrated Vanessa's meager accomplishments, while taking my stability for granted. I looked at the folder with mild curiosity as I placed it on the table and said, "I've been meaning to discuss something with you both." I had already moved on to dessert, as if nothing had happened. My half-eaten dinner had been cleared away. My empty chair had been pushed in. The message was clear. The conversation was over, and they expected me to fall in line as I always had, steadier than I anticipated, and I believe that this is the right moment. My mother's spoon clattered against her dessert plate as she put it down. "Really, Natalie, you're going to ruin the holiday with more drama." Her statement's audacity after what had just happened nearly made me laugh. But I kept my cool because I had practiced this scene in my head numerous times and never fully thought I would proceed. But putting my birthday present in the garbage because of the casual cruelty that had crystallized something for me. "I'm not here to create drama," I said, sliding the folder in his direction. "I'm here to clarify our financial arrangements going forward." My father furrowed his brows and opened the folder, which contained 3 documents. The original mortgage, a formal letter outlining my decision to abdicate all financial responsibility for my family members, a notice of intent to transfer ownership, and an agreement with my signature as guarantor. As he read it, I could see the color leave his face. My mother, sensing his distress, leaned over to read it, her expression changing from annoyance to disbelief. "What is this?" Vanessa, who had been browsing through her phone, finally said, "I'm removing myself as guarantor of your mortgage. I've transferred my stake to Aspen Capital Partners, a private equity firm that specializes in these arrangements," she whispered, looking up at me with wide eyes. "Your sister is abandoning us," my father said, his hands trembling slightly as he put down the papers. His voice was a mix of fear and anger after everything we've done for her. I felt a twinge of guilt, the lifetime's programmed reaction, but I forced myself to push it aside. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just setting boundaries that should have been established a long time ago." I informed them that Aspen Capital would be getting in touch with them in a week to talk about their options for payment. They could refinance, sell the house, or come to an agreement with the company. What they couldn't do was rely on me to save them any longer. "You can't do this," my mother said, raising her voice. "We're your parents, and I can, and I am," I replied. Vanessa finally met my eyes across the table and looked genuinely shocked, maybe at the situation or at seeing me finally stand up for myself after the days after the holiday dinner unfolded in a blur of accusations. Being family doesn't mean I have to burn myself alive to keep everyone else warm. I deserve the same respect and consideration I've always given all of you. And frantic attempts to persuade me to change my mind. My phone was buzzing nonstop with voicemails and messages, each more desperate than the last. In one particularly hurtful message, my mother said, "You've always been jealous of your sister, and this is just your way of punishing us all for loving her too." My father adopted a different strategy, switching between anger and manipulation. "This is how you repay us after everything we sacrificed for you," he exclaimed during an unexpected visit to my workplace, his voice echoing throughout the open floor plan. I led him into a conference room, mindful of my co-worker's interest. He looked at him and said, "Dad, what sacrifices exactly did I make?" "I went to college, built my career without any help or connections, and I've been financially independent since I was 22. We gave you life," he said, as if that gave them the right to own me. "Yes, you did, and I'm grateful for that. But it doesn't mean I owe you my future." He stormed off, but not before implying that if I simply gave Vanessa enough money to reopen her boutique, maybe $200,000, they might think about allowing me to continue serving as a mortgage guarantor rather than demanding that I sell my house outright. Their audacity was astounding. They weren't even attempting to negotiate. Instead, they were making demands. Vanessa used a more subdued strategy, the false olive. "I told them over coffee in a neutral place that I never asked them to put you under this kind of pressure." Her eyes were wide with practiced sincerity. "I had just told them that I was having financial difficulties, and they approached you. I stirred my latte slowly, but you sat quietly while they harassed me and threw my gift in the trash." She had the grace to look. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, I know I've made mistakes with my businesses, but this boutique concept is solid. I just need enough capital to relocate to a better location with more money." I was shocked, embarrassed, and unsure of how to respond. "You never do," I noticed. "Not when it might mean standing up to them." "You're just cutting off your entire family." "I'm not cutting anyone off. I made it clear that I'm still here and still willing to have a relationship, but I'm not willing to be the family anymore." "No," I said firmly, cutting her off. 3 failures is enough data for me to recognize a pattern. Her expression hardened. Bank left without finishing her coffee, and I knew that our conversation would be told to our parents in a completely different way, portraying me as the villain once more, cold, calculating, and heartless. But something unexpected occurred in the days that followed. As I resisted the emotional assault, I noticed an odd lightness creeping in. I found myself speaking up more in meetings and sharing insights I might have previously kept to myself, out of fear of coming across as overly assertive. I also began looking into opportunities for advancement that I had been reluctant to pursue, because I was afraid my family might need my financial stability for the first time. Each demand that I was denied, and every boundary upheld, helped me break free from the invisible chains I had been carrying for decades at work. I was making decisions in my adult life based only on what was best for me, which was both exciting and terrifying. Then, Miss Ruiz, I received a call from Aspen Capital that would completely alter my life. Dominic Weber from Aspen Capital Partners spoke professionally, but there was a hint of worry in his voice. "Do you have a moment to talk about the transfer of the Ruiz property?" I shut the door of my office and sat down. "Yes, of course. Is there a problem?" There was a moment of silence, and I'm afraid there might be. "We've been trying to get in touch with your parents to talk about refinancing options, but they haven't been cooperative. I asked them how, but I already suspected they were saying, 'You forged their signatures on the original mortgage documents.' He said they were threatening." I took a deep breath, thankful for my foresight in meticulously documenting everything over the years. And I can assure you that their signatures weren't forged because I have video recordings of the signing witnesses. Legal action against you and our firm hit me like a physical blow after everything I had done for them." He sounded relieved as he said, "I'll send everything to you immediately that would be helpful." He also mentioned that they had found a lawyer through a family friend named Jason Wilson, which made my stomach drop. Jason Wilson wasn't just any family friend. He was my ex-fiancé from 6 years ago, and our relationship had ended when I found out. The betrayal had been devastating, but I had moved on, thinking that chapter of my life was over. "Miss Ruiz, are you still there?" "Yes," I said, my mind racing. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll have my lawyer get in touch with you directly to handle this." He was secretly transferring money from our joint account to Vanessa's first failing business. I took out my phone and scrolled to a number I rarely used. My cousin Elena, a successful lawyer who had always been able to see through my parents' manipulation. This matter moving forward. After hanging up the phone, I sat still at my desk trying to process this new layer of betrayal. They weren't just fighting me. They were purposefully trying to hurt me by bringing Jason back into my life. My parents' disapproval of her confrontational style, which was really just her refusal to put up with their behavior, was a major factor in our growing distance over the years. Natalie responded with a startled tone. "Is everything okay?" I said, "No, but I hoped you could help me put things right." Over the course of the following hour, I went over everything, including the mortgage, the holiday dinner, and the attempted with Elena on board. I felt more confident in my position, but I also knew that my parents and sister wouldn't back down easily because they had built their entire world. Jason's involvement, the false accusations, and even though Elena listened without interruption, her response was prompt and decisive when I finished. "Send me everything you have, Natalie. It's about time you stood up to them." The next day, a package arrived at my office containing the birthday present my father had thrown away, a custom-bound collection of family photos I had meticulously curated and restored, and a note in my mother's handwriting that read, "We're still family. Don't do this to us." The manipulation was so blatant that it threatened the foundation. I put the book on my shelf without opening it and texted Elena, "They're escalating. What's our next move?" Her response was prompt. "We call their bluff." Almost laughing, I returned the discarded gift as if it had never been thrown away, appealing to family bonds while also threatening me with false legal accusations. 2 days later, Elena and I walked. Jason looked older than I remembered. The boyish charm that had once enthralled me had now solidified into something more serious. We entered the Aspen Capital Partners offices for a meeting with my parents, Jason Wilson, and the firm's representatives. The conference room was tense with anticipation. The image of maternal distress Vanessa chose not to attend, sending a text that morning stating she didn't want to be in the situation. And my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. He was calculating and barely met my eyes as he shuffled through his papers, obviously uncomfortable with the situation he'd been drawn into. "We're here to address the allegations regarding the mortgage agreement for the property at 742 Highland Avenue, which is currently owned by Gerald and Patricia Ruiz, with Natalie Ruiz as guarantor." My father leaned forward, and my daughter forged our signatures. In the middle, as if she hadn't been a major player in this drama from the start, Dominic Weber opened the meeting. Abuse, plain and simple. I said nothing, letting Elena speak first. "Because we had talked about that being a serious accusation, Mr. Ruiz." She said it calmly, and if it turns out to be untrue, it could have serious legal repercussions for the accuser. She then turned her laptop toward the room, and I could see the video recording of the notary's original mortgage signing. Elena added, "As the video concluded, I have statements from the notary and the bank representative present that day confirming the signatures were made willingly and with gratitude." The video started playing, clearly showing my parents signing the documents as part of their routine procedure, thanking me for my assistance, and promising that this would be the last time they needed my financial assistance. We have the originals, secured with timestamps and authentication, but maybe more pertinent to your client's concerns is this document she slid across the table. A complete accounting of all the terms Jason shifted awkwardly, including certified copies that may have been altered or taken out of context. Over the past 15 years, Natalie has given the Ruiz family financial support in the form of loans that have never been repaid, investments in Vanessa's businesses that have never been repaid, contributions to household expenses, and various emergencies. The total, excluding the mortgage guarantee, comes to about $387,000, which my mother exclaimed was ridiculous. "Every transaction is recorded, Elena." The room fell silent as Domino realized the full extent of their financial and moral debt to me. Given this information, does your client want to uphold their claims of forgery, Mr. Wilson? Weber cleared his throat. I firmly stated that bank transfers, checks, credit card statements, and Natalie have kept meticulous records. Jason glanced at my father, who appeared to suddenly lose his temper. They needed to have a private meeting, so they were given a smaller space. While they were gone, Dominic turned to me, Miss Ruiz, and asked, "Why did you keep this arrangement going for so long?" I gave it some serious thought, because they are my family, and I always thought that eventually they would realize the imbalance and want to make I was mistaken. When my parents and Jason returned, their demeanor changed dramatically. My father's defiance had crumbled and been replaced by calculating pragmatism. Jason announced that we were willing to withdraw our allegations and to talk about refinancing options for the mortgage. Elena nodded, which is a good beginning, but my client needs more terms before we can proceed. I saw something I had never seen before. My parents actually listening to my needs as she laid out my conditions, which included a formal acknowledgement of the debt they owed me, a legally binding agreement to stop all financial demands, and a commitment to family counseling. It wasn't quite victory, but it was the start of something new. 3 months after the meeting at Aspen Capital, I sat across from my family at a restaurant. Selected for its neutral territory, this wasn't a party or a reconciliation. Rather, it was a reckoning. My parents had sold their ideal home, a Victorian that had served as the tangible representation of their entitlement, and moved into a cozy condo that better fit their actual financial circumstances. Remaining equity to partially settle their debt to me. They appeared smaller and less intimidating in some way. My mother's dramatic feelings had been replaced by a cautious restraint, and we had enrolled in the financial counseling program. My father said, slipping a registration confirmation across the table, "The first session is, we've been discussing Vanessa's spending patterns, and my mother added that she has agreed to meet with the counselor as well." Vanessa, who had been unusually quiet, looked up as I nodded and accepted the paper without comment the following week. It was one of my non-negotiable conditions that they learn to manage their finances responsibly rather than depending on others to save them. I accepted a position at Gravenhurst Freight from her menu. She explained that it's an entry-level position in their marketing department, but it's steady. I don't know if it's as exciting as running my own boutique, but after carefully examining the numbers, I realized I was never as close to accomplishment because I believed it to be the most truthful thing my sister had ever said to me. Not quite an apology, but an acceptance of reality that had been sadly absent from our family's relationship. She smiled tentatively as I added, "That sounds like a good opportunity," implying that their marketing team has a solid reputation. Face, not the brilliant manipulative charm she typically used, but something more sincere. "Thank you. I'm trying." The changes in my family weren't complete overnight, and there were still stressful phone conversations and times when old habits threatened to resurface. My mother also occasionally made references to financial emergencies that proved to be wants rather than needs. My father still had trouble viewing me as a self-sufficient adult rather than a continuance of their financial resources. But now there were repercussions for going beyond my limits. If they pushed too hard, I would just cut the conversation short and impose a cooling-off period. There was no drama or arguments, just constant reminders that the previous dynamics were no longer acceptable. Elena stayed a constant in my life, guiding me through the difficult feelings of reestablishing my family relationships in a healthier way. She compared it to rehabilitation following an injury, saying during one of our frequent lunch meetings that there would be pain and resistance, but that if you persevered through the program, you would eventually find healing. I applied for a senior position that opened up at Gravora Group and was chosen from a competitive field of candidates. Your presentation demonstrated a confidence we hadn't seen from you before my new job. The changes in my personal life translated into professional growth, freed from the constant drain on my emotional and financial resources. I found myself taking risks I would have avoided otherwise. Following the announcement, the director told me that whatever had changed in the previous few months should work for you. What had changed fundamentally was that I had regained my authority, my resources, and my right to put my own health first. The weight I had carried for so long had not only been financial, but also the debilitating burden of being needed, but never valued for providing. Vanessa's most shocking admission, made during a coffee date between the two of us, was that I had been resenting you for years because you always seemed so perfect, and I felt like I could never measure up. I nearly laughed at the irony of it all, as I was resenting you for receiving all the support and encouragement I needed. Never received. She appeared truly surprised. But they were constantly boasting to others about you. Their successful daughter, who had a corporate job and lived in a nice house. Perhaps I said never. But that conversation signaled a change in our relationship. Not an immediate change into the close sisters we had never been, but the beginning of an open discussion that had the potential to be something genuine because my parents were gradually but grudgingly realizing that respect was a need for a relationship with me rather than an extra. Family counseling sessions were exposing patterns that had been hidden from all of us for generations of emotional control and financial manipulation that had become commonplace through repetition. The path to recovery was just getting started. But for the first time, I was seeing my family as an equal. Not a resource to be used up, but a person deserving of respect and consideration. The mortgage that had previously kept us in an unhealthy dynamic had finally forced a necessary reckoning, and sometimes it seemed that the most profound form of retaliation wasn't hurting the people who had wronged you, but rather taking back what should have been yours. As I drove home from our most recent family gathering, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't seeing my sister accept a traditional job or my parents downsize, but rather knowing that no matter what happened with them in the future, I was finally free to create the life I wanted. Yours all along. Autonomy, dignity, and the right to define the terms of your relationships desired on my terms. Free from obligations or guilt that would have weighed me down in my quest for justice. I had discovered something far more precious: tranquility.